What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Well, I mean, you do realize this mic's not going to pick you up. This mic's not designed to. No, it's not designed to pick up anybody else except for me. Like it's like people are going to think I'm crazy talking to myself. But okay. If you want me to explain the Flash, I can explain the Flash to you. But we're gonna be here for a little while. But it's what time is it? Yeah, yeah. Okay, so it's like 7:30. So that's not a great big huge deal. Yeah. So, God, man. Why do you want to know about the Flash? Why do you want to learn about the Flash? Yeah. TV shows. Yeah, it's pretty good. TV show's pretty good. Okay. Well, I mean, really, man. Jay Garrick was obviously the first Flash. I mean, he was the first one. But it all goes back to Superman, and really even before Superman, and that's one of the crazy things. So one of the big misconceptions people have, and this is probably one that you have, but one of the big misconceptions people have is that back in the day when like Superman and Batman first showed up, that all you had was like DC Comics and then like Marvel Comics, because a lot of people assume that Marvel's been around like forever, right? Like they've always been there and just didn't start publishing anything until 1960. And to a degree, that's true. Back then you had like Timely, which had Captain America, Name of the Submariner, the original Human Torch, Jim Hammond. And then in the 1950s, they became Atlas. And then in the 1960s, they became, maybe it was the late 1940s. But anyway, somewhere along the line, they became Atlas. And then they rebranded for a third time and they became Marvel. But for DC, things were a little more complicated, I guess. And so before comic books, so let's kind of wind the clock back a little bit further. So before comic books, we'll say like 1931. More or less, for the time period between 1931, really like the late 1920s, going into like 1938, for this anywhere between 7 to 10 year window, you basically just had pulp magazines, right? Like the Phantom and Doc Savage and Phantom Stranger, I think it is. But you had like pulp magazines, and these are basically just stories told about adventures and detective work and different things like that. Some of it was paranormal, but none of it involved anybody with any real superpowers. What you had at that time was you had a guy named Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson. And Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson was a guy who wanted to publish comic books, but didn't have the means to do it on his own. And at the time, you had comics insofar as you had like Famous Funnies, which were basically just like reprints of the funny pages, more or less. Yeah, Peanuts. It was reprints of Peanuts. No, it wasn't. But it was a reprint of the funny pages that was thrown into like a comic book format. And so that turned into, is there a market for this? And so Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson was a guy who created like New Fun Comics, created like his own, like the first real comic book with like original drawings and original writing and all that kind of stuff, original scripts, but couldn't get anybody to publish it because people at the time were just kind of like, New Fun Comics is selling. I'm sorry, not New Fun Comics. Pulp magazines are selling. There's an established market for what we're currently doing. Why rock the boat? Why change it? And why spend all this money? Because you got to remember, man, it was expensive to publish a comic book. Like it was really, really pricey. And so it was like, why invest all this time and money in something that may not even succeed? And so like he was blown off by everybody. Now, eventually he ran into a guy named Harry Donenfeld, who ran some kind of like independent magazine company or something. I don't remember what it was called, but he met a guy named Harry Donenfeld, and Harry Donenfeld ran a publishing house, and he published his own magazines, newspapers, different things like that. He dealt with his own pulp magazines. But the two of them went in business together. Harry Donenfeld told, Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, look, I'll publish your comics, but we have to basically form a company together. And so they formed National Allied Publications. Now, National Allied Publications was the overarching publishing house. And then under National Allied Publications, you had Detective Comics Incorporated. And that was where the comics got published. But there were only a couple of them. I mean, really a handful. You had like New Fun Comics, which was their first real publication. Then you had like More Fun Comics. And then I'm pretty sure you had like Adventure Comics, I think was the third one. And so the idea was that by this point in time, Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson had basically been like booted out of his own company. He'd been kicked out of his own company in like the shadiest way ever. It was. I don't remember the story too well because it's been such a long time since I read about it. But it was something like Harry Donenfeld had sent Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson on a trip to Cuba or something like that. And while he was gone, he had him kicked out of his own company or like sued him or something like that for like failure to be a part of the company or something along those lines. Anyway, he used a legal system to oust Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson. And so Nicholson was out. He was gone. And Harry Donenfeld took the company over. And so under Detective Comics Incorporated, Harry Donenfeld wanted to launch a fourth publication, and it was going to be called Action Comics. And the problem with this was that their backs were against the wall. They had no idea how to publish this thing. They were like, like we're well, I mean, they knew how to publish it, but they were like, look, we have like that much time, that much time to publish this. And what ended up happening was you had Harry Donenfeld going to Vince Sullivan, who was the editor, who was going to be the editor for Action Comics, and he said, "Just give me anything. I don't even care what it is. Just throw stuff in it, and we'll send it out. And whatever in the hell happens." And they did that. Vince Sullivan ended up going through like a stack of write-ins. He picked up Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster's Superman, which nobody wanted to publish, and threw it on the front cover and threw it in as the first story. And the comic book industry was off to the races. I mean, after that, it was just like we got this. Like it was on lockdown. That's one of the crazy things. It's like Superman. Yeah, exactly. It was happenstance. That's exactly right. It was a chance. It was just like it was a huge risk. And so with the arrival of Superman, that basically meant that like the superhero genre was born. It was there. It was here to stay. And we knew that just by virtue of the Superman sales. I mean, of course I wasn't alive back then, but like, you go and you look at any of the numbers, or there's a really good historian, Les Daniels, I think is his name, that studies like the history of comic books, and he has a bunch of books out and stuff like that. But he talks about like how Superman had basically blown the doors off this comic book industry, the superhero genre that nobody fully trusted. And so now like all these companies, United Feature Syndicate, and like all these companies out there were basically stuck with egg on their face. But suddenly like all these publishing houses started creating like comic book arms. It was like you had Quality Comics, and you had Timely Comics, which is part of Magazine Management Incorporated at the time, I think. You had, you had them all over the place. Like Charlton Comics, the whole nine yards. You had them everywhere. Everybody was publishing comic books now. And some of them were more successful than others. For example, you had Fawcett Publications, which was a pulp magazine company, that the CEO, the head of the company, went to Bill Parker and C.C. Beck, and he said, "Give me Superman without Superman." And that led to the creation of Shazam. That led to, well, we call him Shazam now. Back then he was Captain Marvel. But Billy Batson, he crushed Superman in sales. I mean, he outsold him by like a margin of 2-1. It was insane. He could fly before Superman. He had his own radio show before Superman. I mean, he was way more popular because Superman was just like a superhero. He was a grown man. But Billy Batson was a kid who could shout the word Shazam and become Superman. And so it resonated with like young kids who were like the biggest demographic for comic books. And so the result was that you ended up going into like this post 1938 era, basically like the early 1940s, with Superman leading the charge of like this whole new generation of superheroes. Well, in addition to National Publications and their Detective Comics branch, while you did have a lot of other copies out there, while you did have a lot of other people publishing their own comics, again, like Timely had Captain America and the Submariner and the original Human Torch, Jim Hammond, you had a guy named Max Gaines. And I want to say it was something like 6 months after the release of Superman, Max Gaines realized how popular Superman was and the fact that there was a market for superheroes. And so he went to Harry Donenfeld and said, "Give me funding to launch my own comic book company, and we'll be sister companies, essentially. Like you'll be in charge of National, and you'll have Detective Comics Incorporated, but I'll be like a satellite company, and I'll orbit around you, and we'll call mine All American Comics." And that's what he did. He founded All American Comics, and that's the irony of the whole thing. Is aside from Batman and Superman, pretty much every character that exists in DC Comics, like the core members of what would become the Justice League, they all originated in All American Comics. The original Green Lantern, Alan Scott, All American Comics. Wonder Woman, All Star Comics #8. She was originally originally an All-American Comics character. The JSA, the Justice Society of America, All-American Comics. And Jay Garrick was the same way. Jay Garrick originally appeared in The Flash, which is it's kind of funny saying this because I guess I don't even know how long this been going on for, but like we're just now getting around to talking about Jay Garrick. Jay Garrick originally appeared in his own in Flash Comics #1, but it wasn't his own solo series. That didn't come until later with All Flash, I think is what it was. All Flash #1. The way this worked back then is anthologies were all the rage. And because it was basically a risk-free way, or at least as close as you could get to a risk-free way, of publishing a wide array of superheroes without having to worry about losing like a ton of money. Because one thing to bear in mind is like it was a crapshoot. I mean, like when you look at Jay Garrick, he was a guy, he was just like some young kid who was working in a science lab, and the professor had left, to go do something, or he'd left for the night or something along those lines. And Jay Garrick was working with like heavy water because it was the atomic age, right? It was going into, well, not really the atomic age per se, but going into the atomic age with like World War II and the new generation of warfare and so on and so forth. And so you had Jay Garrick who was messing with deuterium, heavy water, or something along those lines. And he was basically doused with these chemicals and he was exposed to the chemicals and then passed out. And then woke up in a hospital with the ability to run at like the speed of sound, I'm pretty sure it was. And so like his origin story, it's basically utter nonsense. Like if anybody was exposed to deuterium, I imagine they probably die from radiation poisoning. I don't know if you ever read a story. There's a story that Marvel made something like 10 years ago, and it was written by this guy named Warren Ellis, who has just like the darkest, most cynical view of the world, and it's called Marvel Ruins. And it's I covered it on my channel. So Marvel Ruins was a story where it was like what would actually happen in these circumstances. And there's one segment where the Incredible Hulk, where Bruce Banner's blasted with like gamma radiation and everything, and instead of turning into like the Incredible Hulk as we know him, he's just covered in like these giant blisters, and sores, and dies almost immediately. Like it's pretty gruesome, and it's really, really dark. But anyway. So this goes into with Jay Garrick, his story was basically nonsense. But that's one thing to keep in mind is back then, like there were no templates. There was no standard by which to publish a comic book story. Everyone was flying by the seat of their pants. If Marvel and DC created a story right now, they would have 80 years of superheroes or 80 years of supervillains, depending on what kind of character they want to make. They'd have all that time to base these things off of. You didn't have them back then. Superman was the only real template you had. Aside from that, it was create a character and see if they resonate. So you get like Lex Luthor in Superman #4 or something like that, and you get that whole Superman Lois Lane dichotomy in Action Comics and so on, with eventually branches out into Superman. I mean, it was literally just like experimentation. And so because everything was a crapshoot, it made a lot of sense to publish these stories and see how they would respond. So that's why if you go and you read Flash Comics #1, I want to say the characters that you of course get the Flash Jay Garrick, but you also end up getting Hawkman, the original Hawkman. You end up getting Johnny Thunder, somebody else, and I can't remember who. But in any event, it doesn't really matter. This is the topic of Jay Garrick. And so Jay Garrick could run super fast, and that's what All-American built on. They built on the idea that he was basically Superman parceled out, taking one of his powers, which was the ability to move super fast. And he was popular insofar as almost every superhero was popular back then because they were so new. They were so fresh and vibrant. The problem with this is the biggest problem that you began to run into, was that there was some confusion here and there, because you had a company called Quality Comics, for example, which turned around and published Johnny Quick. And then I don't remember if maybe it wasn't Quality Comics. No, I think it was Quality Comics. There was another company that came along. I think it was also Quality Comics that published stories involving a guy named Quicksilver, which if you look him up, you'll find out that he's actually a guy named Max Mercury. So like it was kind of weird with the speedsters and stuff like that they had, well, at least the people who could run super fast, run at super speed that they had back then. But the biggest problem that the superhero genre ran into, especially with Jay Garrick, because the stories weren't particularly good and they weren't really memorable. The biggest problem that you ran into is that superheroes became part and parcel to World War II. Because World War II, it was a total war effort, right? Like every facet of society was tied into World War II. You had Rosie the Riveter, which came out of it because all the able-bodied men who could like work, they were fighting overseas. And so, I guess with the exception of a handful, I mean, of not really like a massive percentage, but by and large, all the soldiers were men. And so that left like a huge amount of, a huge like hole in the workforce. And so you had like all these facets of society that were contributing to World War II. Comics were the exact same way, like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, the Flash, Jay Garrick, the Green Lantern, Alan Scott, and even in timely, Captain America when he made his debut, Namor the Submariner, Jim Hammond, all these guys. They all fought, and really with Bucky Barnes, they all fought against the Axis powers. And what this meant was that it drummed up sales even higher because it was a way for people to participate, to do their part, so to speak, in fighting the Axis powers by reading comics, by buying comics, contributing to the war effort, and kind of pushing forward the propaganda machine of the United States during the 1940s. The problem with this, though, was that by the time the war ended, the people didn't differentiate. They didn't see Superman as a character who existed before World War II. They saw Superman as a character who was part of World War II. They didn't see like the Flash Jay Garrick or the Green Lantern Alan Scott or Batman or or Wonder Woman or Aquaman, any of those characters. They didn't see them as separate from World War II. Now, the Trinity, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and even when you got into like Aquaman, characters like that, they survived because they were just so popular, because they were so unique. When you go and look at the old comics, Batman and Superman were almost identical. The only difference was like the powers, like the gist of their characters. Batman was Superman without the powers and Lois Lane, and that was basically like they both killed people. Like there was one story I'll never forget. There was one story I read where some guys robbed a bank or something like that, and they ended up driving their truck down the road. And as they were flying down, they ended up flying off this road into a ravine where like the truck explodes and they die in a fiery crash. And Superman just watches it happen. And he's just like, yep, that's kind of what they deserve. And I'm like, damn, Superman, you're kind of an asshole. Exactly. Like Superman's a dick. Like he's kind of an asshole. But Batman like hung a guy from the Batwing and he's like, well, he's better off this way. I mean, like they were pretty brutal. Wonder Woman was strange because the guy who made her, and I can never remember his name, he was obsessed with like bondage. So you go and you read like the old Wonder Woman stories, her weakness was being chained up by men. The guy had some serious issues going on. But still, they were unique. Aquaman talked to fish, and so because of these things, they were very unique characters in their regard, and so they survived. The Flash wasn't unique enough. He just wasn't interesting enough. And so with World War II coming on, with World War II ending, the superhero interest just bottomed out. I mean, there was no real interest there. And unless you were the Trinity and Aquaman, then you were basically cut. Like you were basically cut loose. And so Jay Garrick was just gone. Like he just vanished. Like that was the end of him. He was just gone one day. And it was the craziest thing because with the elimination of superheroes, with those superheroes, DC never answered it. Because by that point in time, National Allied Publications and their child company, DC Comics, had merged with All American Comics and then rebranded itself as Detective Comics Incorporated. And so with them like merging together and forming a singular entity, everything was published by Detective Comics. But like they never answered the question, at least not initially, they never answered the question, where did Jay Garrick go? What happened to the character of Jay Garrick? What happened to the character of Alan Scott? They never answered any of that stuff. Instead, it was just like, yeah, they're gone. And then that's when you start getting into the science fiction realm and you start getting into Barry Allen, the introduction of his character, the Flash, and so on and so forth. But Jay Garrick, his stories weren't very memorable. He wasn't really a special character back then. He's special because of the legacy. I mean, he created like he alongside Hawkman and a handful of others. Let's see, like the Spectre, I think it was. They created the Justice Society of America, the JSA, and there were others who were part of it too. The first real superhero team in comic books. But he's more of a character who's popular because he's the original Flash. Or at least in terms of publication history. Chronologically, it's Max Mercury, but that wasn't established until the mid-1990s by Mark Waid. But publication-wise, he was the original Flash. And so Flash fans love his character because he's like old man Flash. He's got like all this wisdom that he brings to the table, and he's got the discus hat, and whatever. But yeah, the 1950s is when everything changed. That's when the whole scene totally rebooted. And it was kind of crazy. But yeah, no, man, if we're going to turn these into videos, like we should probably stop here, if I'm being honest with you. No, no. I mean, I mean, we don't have to, but we've been doing this for 20 minutes. So, I mean, you know, I figure it's a good place to stop. And then we'll pick it with like Barry Allen, you know, because Barry Allen's when the Flash really gets interesting. You know, that's when things really get cool. You know, when like Eobard Thawne kills Iris West, and then Barry Allen kills Eobard Thawne. Like like the pre-crisis stories of Barry Allen were pretty intense. Actually, they were kind of nuts. And then it goes into Wally West, which is that's when you start getting into like the multiverse, Crisis on Infinite Earths, and all that kind of good stuff. Jay Garrick comes back, things like that. But yeah, we'll talk about that. But yeah, we'll hit stop, and we'll stop the video, and then we'll fire it back up again, and then we'll turn it into you know, like make another video out of it, basically. Because like I told you, man, I mean, we're gonna be here for a little while. You want to learn everything about the Flash, and you got a lot to learn. Man, I will say this though, man, dude. Like, okay, so I'm almost kind of afraid to say it on my YouTube channel, but like, I'm developing a new celebrity crush. Yeah, man, exactly. Yeah, Jessica Parker Kennedy, man. She's the same age as me, and like we have the same skin complexion. No, I'm just messing around. But she seems like a nice person. I don't know. I've never met her, but she's like my new celebrity crush because like she's pretty hot. So I don't know. Anyway, yeah, man. So yeah, okay. We'll go ahead and end this, and then I'm gonna use the bathroom, and then we're gonna go ahead and you know, cut this off. So and then we'll restart it all. So yeah. Okay, cool.